Well, good morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started here. Just a couple of announcements or whatnot before we get started. As I think I've already mentioned to you, in the back of the room, there's food up against the wall. There's water, coffee, and tea over there in front of the little kitchen area. Bathrooms are located right outside of these doors where you came in today. So, as we're going through today, feel free, if you need to hop up, use the restroom, grab some food, refill your drink, whatever, help yourself. We will take a couple of breaks today as well. That's kind of it. The other thing I'll mention is, feel free, if there is something that we're talking about that is not clear, or you have a question about, or anything like that, feel free to ask. This session today is really all about you and helping to educate you on some of the current trends in the racing world, and helping you hopefully come away with some good takeaways that you can use at your races this year. So, feel free to ask questions as we're talking about stuff today, or if there's stuff of a more specific nature, we'd be happy to talk to you about that, one day this week after the event or something like that. Thank you all for coming. I think I know most of you, or at least many of you, but those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet in person yet, my name's Jamie Orr. I'm the owner of Run the East, and I've been, Run the East has been in existence since 2010. I've been running a whole lot longer than that myself as a runner. Because I love running and, have a passion for both running and helping our customers have successful events. And so that's who I am, and I'll be presenting today for the most part. We will have a point today where we have a couple of other race directors who are here today, who I've asked to be part of a panel discussion where we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff they've done at their races, and give you all the opportunity to ask questions of them. Just kind of get another, couple other perspectives of race directors today as well. So as I said, I'm the owner of Run the East. If you're not familiar with us, we are a race timing and management company based here in Greenville. We've been around, like I said, since 2010, and we work with runs, triathlons, cross-country meets, other types of endurance events. And we typically serve over 100 events annually of varying types. We're Race Day certified, Race Joy certified, and Run Sign Up certified. And so that's a little bit of background about me and about the company. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to start off for our first session talking about race trends, what's been going on in the running event business, what some trends are in the last year. And then we're going to do a panel discussion, as I said, with a couple of other race directors. And then the rest of our time, we're going to be focused primarily on marketing, because that was one thing that we heard. We sent out a survey towards the end of last year to our existing customers. By and large, one of the biggest things that we heard was that people really wanted, any help they could get as far as marketing goes. So that's why we're going to talk some about marketing today. All right. So anyway, that's our agenda for today. So we'll go ahead and get right into it, talking about some race trends. So we're going to look at some participation trends over the last couple of years, registration patterns, as well as pricing trends, and at the end, look a little bit at some demographics as well. So the first thing we're going to look at is event participation. And so all of these numbers that I'm going to share for the most part all come from Run Sign Up does a race trends report, which is an annual report looking at what has been happening in the running, racing, and endurance world. And so as you can see, this table is looking at all of the different event types, distances, different types of events, whether we're dealing with a running event versus traditional running event versus an ultra, a tri, different things like that. So from 2020 to 2021, there was a 26% growth across the board. Not a big surprise, given that 2020 we had so few in-person events during 2020. So not a big surprise that we have seen numbers rebounding from 2020 to 2021, which was of course a good thing to see that. So we saw 21% growth. However, we were still not last year back to our pre-COVID numbers, because we still saw an across the board 23% decline from 2019 to 2021. Again, not a huge surprise, in my opinion, not really a cause for concern either, given that for a good chunk of 2021, we still saw events not being held or having to be smaller in number or things like that due to ongoing COVID-related stuff. So, again, not a huge surprise there to see that decline from 2019. But as we'll talk about some today, indications for 2022 so far are pretty good. We're seeing in our business, we're seeing our spring schedule is much more like a typical spring in terms of number of events. Participation numbers are right now looking a whole lot better than they did last year. And we've also started to see some of the bigger races starting to come back, which even last year, as we'll talk about, as some of the smaller races were coming back, bigger races were lagging behind. So that's kind of what we're seeing in participation numbers. Repeats, interestingly, since before the pandemic, we saw a lower percentage of repeat participants. So we saw 12% repeats from 2020 to 21, whereas in 17 it was 17%, in 2018 it was 18%, and in 2019 it was 18%. So which it actually was a little bit better than 2019 to 2020, but still a smaller percentage of repeat participants. So we'll talk a little bit later when we talk about marketing, what are some of the implications of this and what can we do to better try to re-engage participants. But we did see a smaller percentage of repeats there, which was an interesting stat. Event types. So this was a big trend we saw last year, is there was a big, as pandemic oriented or pandemic restrictions eased, we started seeing a big move back towards in-person events and away from virtual events. So last year, across the Run Sign Up platform, about 80% of participants were in person, and that really held true with our numbers as well. What we saw were that events generally that offered both options had roughly 80% of the participants were in person. However, so that doesn't mean that virtual is gone. I think a lot of events have discovered the benefit of having a virtual option past, going on beyond the pandemic, as an option for maybe people who are not in the area, or people who, are not your traditional event participants. There's some who may not be comfortable, whether it be COVID reasons, they may not be comfortable attending an event in person, or some people who may simply, feel like they're not a traditional racer, and maybe feel some level of intimidation showing up at an in-person race, but they're fine to go out and run on their own and compete virtually and get their swag and that type stuff. So I think we've seen, events that are seeing a benefit from offering a virtual option as a more permanent thing and not just a thing during COVID-19. And again, if you think about it, if I told you you could grow your event by 20%, you'd be happy, right? And so if 20% is virtual, even if 80 is not, there's still a benefit for virtual. But a lot of the events, especially what we saw towards the end of last year, like the virtual only events, numbers really were shrinking back as people were, able to have an in-person option. So they were more inclined to participate in those in-person events. So that's what we saw. Event type, event size. So 96% of races last year, again, this is across the whole Run Sign Up platform, had less than 500 participants. And so I think that is, it's somewhat indicative of the fact that the larger races have been the last ones to come back after the pandemic. So I think that's a piece of it. I'll be interested to see what we see in terms of these numbers like in this year. But you can see the bulk of the races were these 1 to 100 with some 101 to 500. So for perspective, there were not a whole lot of bigger events last year. And our numbers were pretty much in line with this as well. We saw probably a smaller than normal number of events over 500 as well last year compared to a typical year. So those are some event trends. The next thing I want to look at is some registration trends. So one of the things, if you've been putting on a race very long, that runners are not very good about signing up in advance. Typically, they normally like to wait till the last minute. Well, unfortunately, COVID made things even a little bit worse still. There wasn't a huge noticeable difference, a relatively small change, but 25 across the whole platform, 25% registered on race week. So, in terms of forecasting and planning for, supplies, needs, stuff like that, it definitely makes it more challenging. But at least, you kind of have some idea in terms of planning. I know oftentimes when we're working with new event directors who haven't done it before, oftentimes they'll get a few weeks out and be very concerned because they say, oh, my numbers are really low, and I'm concerned that nobody's going to show up and stuff like that. Well, we keep this in mind that 25% of people are registering the week of the race, so that has something to do with that. So I just got a question that are the slides on your flash drives? Yes, they are. So all of this is on that flash drive that you have. So 25% registered week of the race. This is not on here, but from just to interject from personal experience, this number varies a bit based upon the shorter the distance of the race, the higher the last minute signups are versus a longer race. So a marathon, half marathon, something like that, that number is going to be lower. But when you're talking 5Ks, it's probably actually going to be higher than that for the week of, because generally speaking, the longer the race, the more people plan their schedules out further in advance, training, stuff like that. You don't find a whole lot of people who decide the night before, I'm going to run a half marathon tomorrow. But plenty of people do it for a 5K. I mean, I've actually when I was not timing as many races, I had impulsively one time woke up on a Saturday morning and said, I don't have anything to do today, I'll go run in a 5K. But you don't really get that with the longer events, but you get more of that with your shorter events. So, you know, and we'll talk about, you know, what some implications are, but think about that in terms of how we're staggering, you know, marketing and pricing and things like that. Another thing, this is a specific stat for 5Ks, but 5Ks typically 85, based upon these numbers last year, 85% of people in 5Ks registered in the last 60 days. So, you know, if you're 2 months out, you know, you're looking at it, you typically have a very, very low percentage of your signups at that point. Now, that's not, obviously there's certain races, some of your really popular races that sell out, things like that, where this might not be the case, but kind of as an average across the board, you can see. And these numbers, you may not be able to see the see up top very well, but the numbers are showing the different events. And so you can see like the 5K has the big peak at the end, whereas things like marathon and half marathon are going to have a lot more people registering further out there. So as I said earlier, it is does have the distance of the event does have an impact on when people sign up. So that's when people are signing up. Another thing that I wanted to mention in regards to signups, race day check-in app. So we see here back in 2021, that's what the purple bars are there, a much higher, especially as we got towards later in the year, a much higher use of the race day check-in app. And some of you that we've worked with before are already familiar with and using the race day check-in app. But one of the things that I sincerely hope is going to be a lasting thing after the pandemic is I sure hope that this finally kills paper entry forms, because really in the year 2022, there's really no reason that any race needs to have paper forms anymore. They just cause more, in my opinion, more trouble than they're worth. And because we now have the technology of the race day check-in app and tools like that to be able to check participants in, it's really rendered paper forms obsolete. And that's, I mean, as you came in today, we were using the check-in app to check all of you in. And so it's, you know, definitely our recommended procedure for how to do race day signups, you know, for just about everybody. So we saw an increased growth there. We also, you know, these numbers are across the whole Run Sign Up platform nationally, but we, in you know what we do with the races we work with, we pretty much exclusively, with a small number of exceptions where the races, you know, weren't willing to do it, we pretty much went to, you know, had everybody on the race day check-in app starting back in 2020. During the pandemic, and then as more races came back, we just started moving more people over to the check-in app, as opposed to using paper forms and things like that for check-in, because it really does make things so much easier. But we saw that, and I think we'll see that number continue to rise. There was also, and I didn't put this stat here because it wasn't necessarily specific to races and stuff, but they sent, Run Sign Up sent all of us who are timers on their platform a survey recently, asked a variety of questions, and one of the questions was asking about which of their technologies do we use, or do we, you know, was our favorite, things like that. And the technology tool that got the most votes for what was most used was the check-in app. So definitely getting good usage. All right, so those are some registration trends, some pricing trends to look at. What we're looking at here is a table showing over the last few years the average price based upon event distance and year. And so, and then we can see at the end a change. So what happened is we look at like 5K, for example, because that's the most popular distance of race. You notice that from 2019 to 2020, there was an average price drop. And this was likely due to the fact that so many races in 2020 were virtual. And so oftentimes races charged a little bit less while they were virtual, only because of some expenses that they were able to save, some things like that. So, so that's what we saw, was a slight dip. So then in 2021, we saw a slight increase, but notice that the average prices for most, like a 5K, a 10K, half marathon, things like that, are still below the 2019 price, and in some cases pretty significantly below. You notice that for an ultra, the average in 19 was $110 and $70. Marathon, the average was 89. It was 74 last year. So there's still been a pretty big drop in the average price from 19 to 21. So we haven't gotten back to the pre-COVID pricing. So, you know, the only thing that dropped from 20 to 21 was ultras. My guess on that is that a lot of, if there was one segment of race that was probably least affected by the pandemic, it was probably ultras, because so many of those take place on trails and people are so spread out that I think they, you know, trail events and ultras and stuff were some of the first ones to come back. So they were probably, as a whole, probably less impacted by the pandemic than a lot of other types of races and things like that. So that's what was going on with pricing. I've got some key takeaways here in terms of some of these race trends, and what what some suggestions to do based upon what some of these trends that we've seen are. First, when we look at the category of registration and participation, as we saw, if 80% of participants are in person, then it makes sense to have an in-person option. I think with, some notable exceptions, runners are interested in a traditional in-person event. So I think an event that is only offering a virtual option is probably going to be, losing some participants because of that. So most should do that. But at the same time, I think a lot of events should consider a virtual option. The cost and the amount of work involved in adding a virtual option to a traditional in-person event is a relatively low barrier. And, for a lot of organizations, picking up another, 15, 20 participants, can make a good contribution to the bottom line. It might be a way to engage some participants and some supporters who otherwise wouldn't be able or, couldn't attend in person. So it gives gives another option for that. So I think that's a key consideration too, in terms of what events to offer, is look at, for a lot of events, offering both makes sense. So some registration things, it does make sense, especially for longer distance events, to open registration early, because while 5Ks, we saw the bulk of people sign up at the last minute when you're dealing with Longer distance events, they don't. So that makes sense. Keep online registration open as long as possible. So what we recommend to most events is keep it open up to race morning so people can sign up last minute, especially as we saw with these shorter distance races like 5K. If your registration is not staying open that late, you're losing some people who would otherwise be signing up. So the longer it stays open, the more people that you can get. We already talked about no more paper, so doing away with paper forms, moving everything online. The tools that are available now. I already mentioned the race day check-in app, but being able to set up for people to do coupon codes and reserved entries and all these things to allow people to make more options, more flexibility, so that people can be signing up electronically and not having to wait, not having to deal with paper forms. So those are, I think, some of the things we can pick up from registration numbers. Looking at the event, one thing I didn't talk about, but we kind of saw in those numbers too, was based upon event distance. 5Ks continue to be the most popular event option. And so, it seems as such, it makes sense that 5Ks would, it would make sense for events to offer continue. 5K is a popular option, half marathons, things like that. Considering that, but also if it's a longer event, consider offering a shorter option. The more flexibility, the more options people have, I think the happier they're going to be. Another registration trend that I don't have it listed up here, but another important thing kind of goes along with, especially if you're offering like both in-person and virtual options. One of the things that we saw during the pandemic, especially early on, like in 2020, had all these people who were signed up for races and races got canceled or they went to virtual or something like that. And so there was a sense where participants kind of like they almost a loss of confidence in events. And so it made people, it seemed like to some degree, it made people reluctant to sign up, especially too far in advance, not knowing, well, am I going to sign up for this? Is the race still going to happen? What's going to go on now with this event? And so one of the things that we've been stressing to people is, especially as we come back out on the other side of COVID, is the importance of being flexible, giving people options of, transferring between an in-person and virtual event. Maybe considering giving people the option to defer if they, at the last minute are not get hurt or sick or whatever, and they can't make it. As much as you can, give people some flexibility with that, offering different event types, different event distances, things of that nature. As much as you can, be flexible, give people options and things like that, and that I think is going to go a long way towards trying to get people back to where they're willing to come and participate and things like that. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. So pricing, we looked at what's kind of was happening with average pricing and stuff like that. One of the pricing keys that, if you've attended this before, that I tend to talk about every year, is the importance of doing market research. What are other races in your area charging, and what are people getting for that? Because, whether or not you realize it, runners are doing that. They're comparing, I ran this race and I paid this much and this is what I got, and I paid this much for this one and this is what I got. And so if your race is either, overpriced relative to the market, or, the value, what they're getting in terms of experience and swag and stuff like that isn't in line with what they expect, then they may not come back next year. And, on the other hand, if your race is one that really offers a lot of bang for their buck, it's one that they're going to be really interested in coming back and supporting. And, that's what we see in terms of numbers, is that the races that are offering a really good experience, good swag, things like that, and are priced reasonably, those are the ones that seem to be growing, because that's what, really people are after, something like that. Another pricing thing to keep in mind is to use staggered pricing, or use different pricing tiers. So because it can help by, if you have one, or depending on event distance would be how many you could have. But if you had at least one, preferably maybe more than one, pricing tiers, when the price goes up, it can help drive people to register early. And as we'll talk about in marketing, it can also give an opportunity for a way to push market that price increase, because I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but there's a big jump in registrations anytime in the 2 to 3 days before a price increase. So not only should you have price increases, but you should use them strategically to push push emails and Facebook and all that stuff, like we'll talk about in marketing. Push all of that, use that to push that price increase, promote it so people see it, and then they in turn go, you can drive them to go ahead and sign up. So that's another key takeaway as far as pricing goes. Another thing that I decided to throw in here at the last minute, but I didn't get it on here because it actually came up on a call I was on with somebody yesterday, but was a little bit about demographics. What makes up, what is a typical race participant that we see. And so what I did is I looked in not just at the Run Sign Up platform, but I looked specifically at people that were signing up for races that we've been a part of. And so what I found, the numbers were similar to what they've been in the past. They really haven't changed a whole lot. 62, I think it was 62, it was around 60% of participants are female. And so, I think that's, we have to think about that again, as what we're talking about later today. Think about that in terms of marketing. Thinking about if 60% of events are, 60% of participants are women, but I think I could probably count on one hand last year the number of races that offered female shirt sizes and not just unisex. So, think about stuff like that. Is that going to be something that could help be a selling point if 60% of participants are females? Offering some lady shirt sizes might be a good idea. Or think about your marketing. If you're putting images on social media, what do the people in that image look like? Do you have a variety of different people, especially if 60% of women? Do you have women represented in that marketing? Things like that. Women also, from surveys, are typically more interested in the experiential piece of a race and doing it with friends and as a part of a group. So what other things like that could you offer? Set up groups or teams for the race. What kind of experiences and things like that can you offer to make it more enticing? Think about stuff like that. In terms of age, that was another thing that I looked at when we were talking about demographics. 55% roughly of event participants are between the ages of 30 and 54. So the bulk of runners are right in that middle area. And so, you know, this was the conversation I had. This was in the context somebody was asking about doing a race here in Greenville and not wanting to, like, you know, if they did it after ECU was out, would it impact turnout? And my answer was basically no, because, you know, the numbers say like 2% of your runners are between ages 20 and 24. So that's not really going to be a big hurt to do that. So you think about, you know, age 30 to 54, you know, if you think about, you know, what do you do specifically to market to people in that age group? You know, what social media platforms are they on? What kind of stuff do they value and like, and stuff like that? And I will say, you know, especially on the lower end of that group, you know, I don't know exactly where the cutoff is for what's considered a millennial or not, but when you look at like the millennial generation, they're a lot more interested in experiences, you know. So you know, what does your race offer experience-wise that kind of makes it stand out, makes it a little bit different, unique, stuff like that. Swag factors into that too, because again, it's not, you know, it's not necessarily just about running the race. It's about having that Instagram worthy photo at the finish line, or, you know, the being able to share the picture of the swag, or, you know, something like that. It's all about that. And so that's why we see, you know, you look at some of these bigger races and you see, you know, photo booths, PR bells, you know, all that kind of stuff, because it all comes back to, you know, setting up the experience, setting up the ability to, you know, get that photo op, you know, share that selfie, things like that, which all factor into how to appeal to that millennial demographic. You know, but obviously, if we're looking at 30 to 54, that's a pretty wide range. But you know, if you think about how to better reach women ages 30 to 54, then you're going to be a long way towards, you know, towards reaching what a demographically, you know, speaking, a typical race participant looks like. Now, obviously, there's going to be some variation there. If you're in charge of a race at a school, then that's going to skew everything to one end. You know, so it's, you know, that it will vary a bit based upon, you know, event specifics and things like that. So those are some of, you know, the race trends that have been going on. Like I said, looking at different areas of registration and pricing, events, participation, demographics, stuff like that. Any questions from this first section on demographics, or race trends and what to do with those race trends, or how to respond? Teams? Oh yeah, a lot of races do teams. What we see most commonly is what I would characterize as a social team, which is just giving people the ability to sign up as a part of a group. And so, you know, depending upon like how much you encourage it and that type of stuff, you know, some groups, you know, get all into it and they'll get their own special group t-shirts made up and they all show up wearing the same shirt, run the race together, that type of stuff. So with that, by a social team, what I mean by that is it's not going to be scored or anything as a team competition. Most races do the social teams to give people the ability to sign up. And I want to say, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think races that offered a team option, somewhere between 25 and 30% of the participants were on a team. So for races that offer it, they're generally pretty popular. You know, I would stress though, if you're going to do it, it's got to be promoted. If it's just kind of out there as, hey, you can sign up on a team, not very many people are going to take advantage of it. But when it's really pushed, promoted, you know, it can be successful, and it can be a way to get people out there. You know, because then effectively, if I sign up for your race, I can then go recruit some of my friends, say, hey, come join my team, let's do this together. And so it can have the, you know, can give them, they can actually give you some help in, you know, getting the word out, and that type of stuff. You know, so that's what we most commonly see is a social team. A few races not as popular do like an actual score team. So we have a race next weekend with a competitive, or I mean, I use that term pretty loosely, but where people for Valentine's Day, you can sign up in a 2-person team and compete based upon the combined time of the team. So you can sign up and compete against other people. And then for this particular race, what we do is we age grade everybody's time. So that way, if, you know, a 20-year-old male's time is going to count at the same time as, say, somebody who's 65, that 65-year-old at the same time is going to count better. And so it kind of allows us to put everybody on a level playing field, regardless of, you know, who the team is. So if 2 ECU cross country team members show up, they're not going to just automatically beat everybody else, because they're, you know, their age grade will factor that into play. So yeah, teams can definitely be an effective way, effective tool for an event. Yeah, you can turn. There's an option called fast registration options that you can turn on, like on race day, where you could set it to where people don't have to sign into an account to sign up. And you can also bypass steps like if you're not giving out t-shirts on race day, you can bypass that. You can bypass like putting in their physical address, things like that, to make it faster for people to sign up, either on race day or just on mobile devices in general, or things like that. Yep. Yeah, they would still go on their phone and sign up. You know, we have some races that will actually set up like a laptop for them to sign up on, in like what's called like an expo mode sign up. So that's another option. You know, we find by and large people are more comfortable with their own devices, so they're more likely, or they'd rather do it on their own device. You know, what we you know, another thing that can help with that is printing up signs. Like for our race next weekend, we've got some signs that basically say need to register, and then says, you know, go to, and we have the custom URL, or we stick a big QR code. So runner can just go up, scan the QR code, and as opposed to having to go to like run sign up, find the race, it just takes them specifically to the sign up page for that race. So they scan that QR code, and boom, they go right to it. And you can find, you know, you can make a QR code. There's lots of free QR code creators online, but actually when you are logged in to the run sign up page for your race, you can download a QR code from there that'll link specifically to your race page. So they can go straight there. So I do recommend that. You know, the cost of a sign is pretty cheap. And the cool thing is that QR code doesn't change year to year. So you print a few of those signs up one year, you use them every year, and people can just scan that to sign up. And that can help people as opposed to having to enter in the site or anything like that. So yeah, I would recommend a combination of that, some QR code signs, fast registration options. You know, you could possibly think about a laptop or tablet if you wanted to do that as like a kiosk setup. The only thing I would caution you on that is if you have a kiosk for people to use, you also need a volunteer to babysit it and help people, because generally people who are going to be using that don't have a phone with them, so they're not as tech savvy, so they're more likely to have questions or issues trying to sign up. Yeah, so how long to organize an event? Typically speaking, we recommend for at least 4 to 6 months. With the, you know, some longer races would be, you know, maybe allowing even more. You know, could you pull a 5K together in less than 4 months? Sure. You know, is it, you know, would you feel more comfortable if you had 4 to 6 months? Absolutely. You know, when you're dealing with longer distance races, though, you might even go longer, just because people are planning out their stuff further. And like we saw in that one, you know, when you get into half and full marathons, a lot of people are signing up more than 120 days out. So you need to at least have, you know, enough lead time where your registration's open and that kind of stuff. For health team, yes, definitely, we recommend having, you know, EMS or, you know, some other form of medical support available at a race. You know, different municipalities have different policies and different, you know, different guidelines for how they handle that type of stuff. But it's definitely a good idea to me. You know, when I'm organizing an event, the two things to me that are always non-negotiable are having dedicated EMS out there and having a good liability insurance policy. So those are two expenses that I happily pay year after year, just because I know I'd rather have them and not need them than the alternative. Other questions? EMS, like medical coverage and liability insurance. And I will mention this. I know that wasn't directly your question, but since I said something about liability insurance, one thing I have learned, and I've probably talked to some of you about this, is if a lot of general liability policies do not have sufficient coverage for races. Like if your organization has some type of policy that you add on like an event to, a lot of special event policies are going to either have an exclusion for athletic events, or their athletic event coverage will cover participants. I'm sorry, will cover spectators, but not participants. But obviously at a race, your biggest liability is from the actual participants. So for that reason, you know, I would definitely suggest, instead of assuming that what you have will cover, be very clear, get a copy of the policy, make sure there's sufficient coverage, and then if not, you know, go with a specific policy specific for running events, which is, you know, usually the safest bet. Mm-hmm. You know, well, there's a couple of different schools of thought on this. One school of thought would be, you know, you advertise that you have to sign up by a certain date, and you know, and then either depending, some people will hold fast to that and say, if you're not signed up by that date, you don't get anything, and they'll just simply order by that date. And if you're after it, you're out of luck. Would be one option. Another option is to, you know, using some of these statistics. Basically, you could still say you're only guaranteed a shirt by this date, but then try to forecast, like if it's a 5K and you're ordering swag 2.5 weeks out, if statistically you're going to get 25 to 30% signups in that last week, you could just simply increase that swag order by, you know, 40% or whatever to cover that. Obviously, that's going to be potentially a little more risky. You know, if the turnout sign up in that last week wasn't as much as you would expected, but you know, could possibly, that could be another way to handle it. Yeah, that's a good thought. And when you've done it multiple years, you have also more of a pattern of your registration specifically for your race. So you can look and say, okay, well, at this point out last year, I had this many people, and use that to kind of come up with some of those numbers more specific to your event as opposed to just general averages.
Amy, would you repeat the questions from the audience for us folks on Zoom, please?
Right. Yeah, that's a good thought. Giveaway inventory. I had someone online ask to repeat the question. We're talking about forecasting swag orders. So. Yeah, if you do that, just make sure you're building your the cost of that in, because by the time you'll probably pay more for that second order because it'll be a smaller order, and then you have to ship to those people too. So just make sure if you do that, you know, you're factoring that cost in, like with a price increase or something like that, to make sure you're covering that. But yeah, that's a good idea too. Yes. I don't know it off the top of my head, but if you want to like email me after the fact, I can tell you average across all races. Obviously, your participation numbers could skew that one way or another. If you have a lot of kids or more women or, you know, things like that, it could drive those numbers a little bit. But yeah, I can give you that. And then what I personally do, in terms of ordering for an event, if I'm placing the order, is I will look at my orders so far and then just carry those percentages out. So like if I've got 50 shirts that I have like 50 people signed up and I'm going to order 75 shirts, I'll just basically project it going out from there. So other questions so far? All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I would have to look at it to see, but I would say if so, very few. You know, most, given where our events are located, most events we work with are in Eastern North Carolina. And so for the most part, the heaviest concentration of runners are in Eastern North Carolina. So I would say, you know, when I can pull up a heat map of participants, and, you know, it represents a lot of the cities in Eastern North Carolina are the heaviest concentration. You know, a few out of, you know, a small percentage out of state coming in for specific events, but for the most part, Eastern North Carolina. Okay. Anything else? We're taking a quick break. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. We'll start back in 10 minutes, and when we start back, we're going to do our session, our race directors panel session, where I've got a few questions to talk with a couple of directors of successful races in the area. So we'll talk about that, and then we will get into marketing. So help yourself, food in the back, drinks over there, bathrooms are out there, and we will start back in 10 minutes. All right. Well, we're gonna get started back here. And we're going to do our race directors panel.